Hello and welcome to the T-Force LCS Rundown, episode 68, week 4 of the North American and European LCS. My name is Makanorum. I'm your host, I'm your friend, I'm your confidant. This week, I am joined by two lovely gentlemen, Optimus Tom.
And I'm the dark confidant, so you draw extra cards and lose life off of my advice.
Ooh, a little MTG there. We also have carrying the backs of the missing Sifa Dracos and Serial Baux and Chris Kringler, Mr. Kyle, the Anti-Mot.
And I will play my 7-star monster with 3,000 attack points because I don't play Magic.
Get out of here.
I used to play Magic, and then I sold all of my cards when I left college.
I don't know. I was always a Yu-Gi-Oh kid, so that's where my heart lies.
Now you're anti-Tom on two circumstances here.
two levels here, yeah.
Oh boy, well we have a fantastic show for you this week. Lots of exciting LCS stuffs to talk about, but more exciting than LCS stuffs.
Impossible.
Winning RP.
Okay, maybe.
Not all of us can be Rito and get infinite accounts, Mr. Optimus Tom. For those of you who listened to my lovely one-on-one conversation last week, we are running a promotion this week for you to win some nice RP from your loving network, the T-Force Podcast Network. We're not the only show who's doing it. Pretty much every show on the network and every social media source we have has a promotion running currently. You can only win once, but take as many chances as you can to win this free RP. You've got two opportunities from the LCS Rundown. Basically, what we need you to do is go ahead and give us the top 3 teams after week 5. Now, of course, that means you have to submit your answers by Wednesday in order to be able to be considered, because it would be kind of cheap if you already knew what the answers were when you submitted. And if you submit one for NA, you'll get a chance to win. If you submit one for EU, you get a chance to win. If you submit both, you have to both be right, and then you'll get 2 chances. So a bit of a gamble. You can call those in to 978-378-0257. You'll get the voicemail box automatically. You can leave us a voicemail there. We love listening to them. Or you can send us an email at lcs@trinityforcepodcast.com.
I'm just going to point this out right now. We don't ever hear the voicemails. Mott just tells us what they are. So
I'll play them if they're good.
Which makes it more hilarious, actually.
I'll play them if they're good, because I don't know, for those of you out there in podcast land, if you've ever used Google Voice, but it is fantastic because it tries to translate into English whatever the message is, which with everyday stuff, great. Google does an awesome job. For LCS stuff, super exciting to see how many words it tries to make up. But let's move right along into some LCS news for this week before we get into EU and NA. Not too much happened this week. Some double lift mischief, which we'll talk about in our fantasy segment at the end of the episode. But a big bombshell out of Team Solo Mid in the North American LCS. They have announced, with quite the well-produced YouTube video, that they are going to be trying out Keith, formerly, well, I guess still of Team Liquid, for the position of starting ADC.
Yeah, that's very strange. Like, well, first off, I guess it's really strange when you think about it, because you think like, oh man, TSM, they're the roster that like sticks together. You know, they're doing great. There's no reason to change anything. And then you look at some of their more recent games, you see how they're a little bit more back and forth, how it could potentially be more of a comeback, and you look at their performance at MSI, and within TSM, you know, a lot of organizations and all the players always say like, man, I'm disappointed with my team's performance. I hope we do better next week. I hope we improve. And some of the players on TSM, like especially Dyrus, have been proving that, yeah, they want to improve. I don't know if Dyrus has died in the past week or so, which is enormously impressive when you remember what Dyrus was like in top lane in Season 3 especially. They made I still joke around saying there's a warding trinket because Dyrus never bought wards in top lane. And then he still never wound up using it. But no, Dyrus has made a huge marked improvement, but TSM is looking at their team internally and saying, how can we improve to be even better so we do not repeat the same mistakes we made at MSI? And one of the players that has been a little bit lacking has been Wild Turtle. Now, Wild Turtle hasn't been performing, even though some of the AD carries that he liked playing way back when, which nobody else played, like Sivir, are extremely popular. So if you're not going to have an AD carry that is grouping with the team or is able to synergize and keep up to the same level as the rest of his team, then he's going to slowly fall off. And so in order to challenge Wild Turtle to step up his game, or in order to improve TSM as a whole, I think it's great that they wanted to bring on Keith. I don't know if he's exactly the right fit for the team. He's definitely more of a resource-heavy AD carry, as he showed when he substituted for Team Liquid, playing things like late-game hyper carry Kog'Maw and playing the Jinx, which I absolutely love him for, running around and getting kills and resets in team fights, but getting a lot of kills and taking some of the resources that TSM normally funnels into Bjergsen. Don't know if exactly the perfect AD carry for their team, but it's great, and there's nothing to say that if this tryout goes well, that they can't have both. Like, maybe they wind up going into a substitute roster kind of situation like CLG has the availability to do, like Dignitas has the availability to do, but none of them have actually done yet. I don't know. We'll have to see.
A lot of what you're saying is evidenced by a quote from Reggie that I pulled out of that video. He basically said that post-MSI, he took Turtle and he took Dyrus aside and basically told them, hey, this is going to be a team decision pretty soon. If you guys don't step it up and want to win, we have worlds to consider. And they said in the video, as you mentioned, Tom, Dyrus stepped it up huge. And we've definitely seen that. His Gnar play recently has been just absolutely stellar. It's almost like the Dyrus that we used to see in days of old. But TSM, you said it's the roster that sticks together. I would disagree. TSM has always been the one to make the tough decisions and make roster moves that, for better or for worse, have always ended up turning out really great. Losing the star power of Xpecial was initially a huge hit to fans. To see somebody like that who's been with the team for so long, such a powerful name, that kind of sucked. But to then see Lustboy come in and do so great, it was an awesome decision. Same thing with bringing in Amazing at first, but then the move to Santorin. You could even go back to the bringing in of Bjergsen. Just lots of great decisions. Is Keith going to be that?
Or the bringing in of Wild Turtle to replace Chaos.
Well, that one game, that first game that he came out in, he got a pentakill. And that's a lot of hype. And maybe
it was against Complexity, though.
Yeah, still to show up on a main stage like that is still impressive, and for whatever reason, Wild Turtle isn't playing up to par. Now, they haven't made any decisions yet. Keith is actually still technically a Liquid player, and we went over a couple weeks ago the exact rigmarole that a player has to go through now if he's going to be switching teams. It's a long and complicated process, but basically it's come down to where Liquid has given TSM permission to scrim Keith. And Wild Turtle's under fire now. I think if they went the distance to make this video, that's kind of saying, like, hey, Keith's coming, give it hype. But it's not decided yet.
Also, props to Liquid for allowing them to do this, really, because at the beginning of last split, Keith was hyped up as being better than Piglet. Obviously, that turned out to be a little bit different once they got their situation. But still, he's a very good player, and the fact that they're allowing him to go over to TSM, who is a competitor, in the middle of a season like this, it's a good gesture, and it shows that these bigger organizations are, above the pettiness of, oh, you're an enemy, so we're never going to let you touch our people.
Yeah.
It actually speaks to two kind of things that I find really interesting. One is how organizations like Liquid, like TSM, like even CLG, when we were going back to rumors about the Stixxay situation, where they're extremely player invested, and they are always looking out for these younger guys. Like, Keith is just out of high school. Like, I don't think he went to his prom, actually. So he just skipped his prom. Like, so like this kid is extremely young, just out of high school, not even in college, wants to play this game, and he's working with two organizations that have his best interests in mind, which is fantastic. And at the same exact time, it's also strengthening the core of the NA LCS, or the NA as a region, in competitive League of Legends. Instead of holding on to Keith and never using him for their main roster because Piglet's actually shaped up now, or trading him away to some challenger team or just somebody else just so they can wind up having more money to invest in themselves or something along those lines, or even just TSM going outwards and looking for an AD carry from a different region, which I don't think they actually can do right now, or looking for, just somebody else that's like an established name. It's generating talent within its own scene from the challenger scene, bringing it up into NA and trying to strengthen the region as a whole between two, like you said, rival organizations. I think it's awesome.
Yeah. I don't know if it's all that. I see it primarily as a respect move to their employee. But who knows? We'll see if it even comes to light. Maybe this is the nod to TSM saying thanks for special. But let's move into the LCS. Before we do, I don't think I mentioned it at the top of the episode. We are proud to announce a new segment added onto the show for podcast listeners only. I will be taking you through the challenger scene. As you well know, at the end of every split, we are going to be welcoming a new challenger team into the LCS. Minimally one. We may get two if we're lucky. Maybe get three if, the region happens to suck at that particular time. But I will be taking you by the hand and guiding you as we go from week to week. That starts this week. The Challenger Series starts this week.
Yep, Wednesday.
6 new teams battling it out. Lots of new faces, lots of old faces. Super excited. So if you're listening on Twitch, the episode will be out tomorrow morning. So be sure to catch that in podcast land. Those of you in podcast land, I got you. So let's talk about Europe.
Woo!
This was a headliner week.
This was. It was hype.
Lots of exciting things happening. And I'm going to let Mr. Tom take it away with our headline match for the week. OG versus Fnatic.
I thought you meant like Elements versus Rocket. Come on, isn't that the headline match of Europe?
Origen versus Fnatic. Maybe the new El Clasico.
Oh, no. All right, so that's not what El Clasico is. And
no, I think this is more of like a TSM CLG thing almost.
That's not an El Clasico thing either.
No.
So the thing with El Clasico was it was two organizations of SK and Fnatic and people like Xpeke and people like Ocelot and those people battling back and forth, and then the terminology just stuck. So now it's referred to as El Clasico, when in reality, nobody from the El Clasico is even involved in it anymore. Because this spanned before Yellow. Well, technically, Yellowstar was on SK.
Yeah, Yellowstar was on SK for it, so I mean, technically, he's still there.
The only surviving member of El Clasico between those two teams.
Actually, wasn't Candy Panda on?
No, Candy Panda was the replacement for Yellowstar. Candy Panda left, Yellowstar came on for Season 2 Worlds, then he left and Candy Panda came back.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Anyway, now that we've gone through that history lesson here, let's talk about Fnatic Orange versus Fnatic Black. I'm sorry, Origin versus Fnatic. So, it was really, really hyped up match. I think the match itself, if you haven't watched the VOD of it, it's definitely worth watching because it kind of delivered. I would say it was worth a lot of the hype.
I would say it was certainly worth the hype.
Yeah, it was a very entertaining match to watch. It was very close.
Undefeated teams, and then within like the first 5 minutes, it's nothing but fights.
Well, yeah, so that was the thing. It was a lot of scrappiness in the beginning. Well, let's tune in for like picks and bans, because first off, Origen bans out a lot of things against Huni, and then they wind up banning Jace, who on this most recent patch, if you guys don't remember, if you haven't listened to the proper in a while, Jace no longer scales up his ultimate. He has 6 abilities. He has 6 levels of all his 3 QWE abilities, and his ultimate automatically scales up with levels. So he's a lot more of a powerful pickup, especially with a lot of AD mids being played recently. Like, we have Varus, we have Ezreal, those kinds of things. So he's very pokey back in the meta. He gets banned out because not only is Huni a very competent top laner, but Febvin used Jace to carry H2K through the expansion tournament almost single-handedly. So Jace gets banned away, but they leave Echo open for Huni. So he gladly takes that one in this one. And then from Fnatic, they wind up trying to ban out Mithy. And if you tune into the interview afterwards at Yellowstar, they say that they were banning out Mithy because Yellowstar and Mithy are very similar players, and Yellowstar knows that if you put Mithy on something that he's not necessarily planning to play, or he's going to be a little bit less practiced on, that means that Orihen's strategy overall is going to be a little bit more shaky. So they specifically targeted the shot caller on Orihen to try to kind of put him on tilt, similar to what teams used to do against Cloud9 High. So basically, it starts out extremely, extremely bloody. There's a lot of scraps in the jungle. There's a couple of kills that wind up going down early on. But the first big team fight really goes in favor of Fnatic. And that's when you kind of think, oh man, like this is going to be Fnatic's game now. They took the first kind of scrappy fight. They came out with like a 4-for-2. But Orihen winds up getting a Baron steal in the later edges of the game, and they wind up trading kills back and forth, and it's a 2-for-2 again. Then they wind up taking a dragon, and Orihen starts to pull out in a slight lead against Fnatic, and you're like, oh my god, this game is super exciting. Everything's going to wind up going wrong. But then Huni, and that Echo pick that they let slip through picks and bans winds up getting an amazing catch on Niels. I think it was playing Sivir in this game. And they wind up snowballing that lead. Just that little thing snowballs into a dragon, it snowballs into a couple more kills, and then Fnatic never lets go of the reins of that game.
So, I mean, what's this telling you about Origin as a team? I mean, we all knew this was going to be the test. This was the one team that you could really make a solid argument that Origin wouldn't be able to beat. I'd still argue that they did pretty okay, but what's your impression on how Origin fits within Europe now, having faced the best of the best?
I like I said before, I thought they were like a top 4 team, and then SK started sucking, so now I guess they're a top 3 team. Like, Orihen here proved that, you know, they do have the chops to go up against a team like Fnatic. They showed that even when things get a little bit scrappy and that style doesn't necessarily pan out for them early on, they do have the ability to kind of bounce back and still have the ability to kind of shot call themselves out of a little bit of a hole. So in this circumstance, we saw that there was a little bit of resilience on them. However, we also found out that they do have some weaknesses, and they're not necessarily immune. Big thing, like we said, Fnatic targeted Mithy in picks and bans. Mithy had to go down the tier. He couldn't play Alistar, which is arguably the best support to pick on the patch currently, at least if you talk to Crepo and Deficio about it. They keep saying how if Alistar is left open, that it should be 100% picked right away. Thresh, which Mithy has been ridiculously good on, and is a character that can also protect an AD carry, such as Niels, who they funneled every single kill onto this game to try to carry them out of this one. And of course, they get rid of the Morgana, which is another character that's just really good at creating pick opportunities while protecting a carry on the team. So the Annie can flash engage, does have the Tibber stun and the AoE to set up these fights, but doesn't necessarily have the same protection for their carries. And so we saw Xpeke's Azir falling way behind Febvin in lane on Victor, which we don't necessarily see the Victor into Azir matchup. We're kind of really used to seeing like the Cassiopeia Azir, and Cassiopeia was left open in this one, but they chose not to go for it. So Peke falls behind in a matchup that people usually opt out of in favor for the Azir. Niels winds up falling behind a little bit early, but is able to get these kills in team fights being fed onto him. And Soaz struggles a lot against, not necessarily directly against Huni in this one, although they did wind up laning against each other after some really, really awesome to watch, like 4v0 tower swap situations in the early game. So if you guys want to see a game about rotational play, watch this one, because it was a bit back and forth in the early game. We didn't really have anybody in lanes for a little while. It was kind of cool. But, overall, like, it just kind of seemed like Fnatic's individual players were just slightly one step ahead of Orihen's players, and if Orihen may have had one of those more comfortable supports for Mithy, and their shot calling was maybe just a little bit more in line, they did have a point in time where they kind of came back and started to turn things around. So if they had that, you know, they had that safety net, the comfortable support, the ability to pick somebody out like that, they may have very well have won this game. but Fnatic definitely showed that individually as well as a team that they are still number one in Europe.
So at this point, Fnatic still stands undefeated. They're currently 8-0. They're going into, I think, a pretty easy next week for them, week 5. Whoa! No, hold on. I was looking at 6. Sorry, that's a complete reversal. We're going to back up. Beep, beep, beep. Super difficult week for them next week, or at least a challenging week. I won't say anything is going to be super difficult. As you all well know, the week 5 split is where we finally get through day 1 rather, is when we finally have all of the teams playing all of the teams once. So that ends up being Fnatic finally facing off against the 7-1 H2K. And it's our game. It's our game to watch next week, for sure.
It's the game of the week, isn't it, in Europe? I think it is. Has to be.
It's number 1 against number 2, and to be completely honest, I think that's where the teams will wind up falling at the end of the split, number 1 and number 2. So this is a chance for Fnatic to be undisputed king of Europe, having beaten every single team at least once. It'll tie them for their previous winning streak record at 9 straight wins, which it might have been stopped by H2K last split with the quote-unquote Kasing effect came into effect.
No, it was Gambit, wasn't it? I thought it was Gambit who keeps breaking their winning streaks.
I don't remember. I have to go back and double-check that. But, so Fnatic has a chance to go 9-0, be undisputed kings of Europe. H2K, in the meantime, if you listen to Lulex in the intro to the Fnatic versus Orihen match this week, he kind of said, I forget exactly what he said, mainly because it's a little hard to understand his very heavy French accent, but it was something along the lines of like, yeah, whoever wins this will be the best team in Europe until they play H2K. So a little bit of trash talk from Lulex. I'm really, really hyped up about this one, because if Orihen and Fnatic had a ton of strategical play, there was double jungling, which turned into a 4v0 lane swap, tower pushing situation. There was a play from Huni where he was going to go back to a lane early on, but he opted to recall and then go cross map and help out on the opposite side of the map instead. So he didn't put himself at a detriment in farm, and he just wound up finding an opportunity to give himself something in the early game as a 1v2 kind of lane situation. He wound up finding Soaz, and they wound up going head to head in that lane situation, but there are a lot of map movements in Orihen versus Fnatic, and I'm expecting to see even more in H2K against Fnatic, especially because H2K's games are usually won strategically through the first 10 minutes of the game. So if H2K comes out with a slight lead against Fnatic in those first 10 minutes, and they don't wind up dying unnecessarily, like a lot of teams find themselves doing against Fnatic in their scrappy style, then we really have a really, really good match on our hands.
It's definitely going to be an exciting matchup, but still exciting matches from this week. SK going from top to bottom in our discussion. SK Gaming is finally able to pull out a win, and not just one, but 2. Going 2-0 this week up against Unicorns of Love and Rocket.
Let's be real, though. These are the teams they needed to win against. These are the teams you expected them to win against, because they're closer to them in the standing, especially after this week. Their first game against Unicorns of Love, that was a sloppy game to watch. It was lots of trading back and forths and a 2-for-2 team fight here and a 1-for-2 there. And it just ended up going to death timers at the end of the game, really. There was one. Go ahead, Mark.
The fights in this game reminded me of 2 children on a playground beating the crap out of each other, just flailing their arms, getting super tired, and then just going back at it again. I mean, it was overextension after overextension, minor trades, tit for tat. And it just, to me, this said more about Unicorns of Love and their consistency than it did about SK being able to put on a win.
Yeah, I completely agree. This was a very sloppy game from both teams. This was not top-level European play. If they were playing H2K, Fnatic, or Orihen, then this was an easy loss for either of these teams. This was a lower level game. It's good that SK won it. They finally got a win. Now they're back somewhat in the race to get out of relegation. They're closer to everybody else now. It helps. But again, this was not a good game to judge them and say that they're back. Basically, Unicorns Love have been playing very inconsistent over the past few weeks, so both of these teams needed to step it up. And SK looked a lot, well, I wouldn't say a lot better, but they looked better in their game against Rawcat.
Yeah, I mean, Fox picking up the Cass this week, he was able to do work in both games, really, on that champion. I mean, this is one where, SK definitely looked a lot tighter. They had better dragging control. They were able to team fight better than Rockcat was, despite a very close gold lead. Candy Panda got to do what Vanes do, which is run around, solo out people, and the fact that they had a Shen who could completely take off all of the attention that would be thrown on Vayne, and the fact that Freddy stayed with Candy Panda almost the entire game really allowed Candy to get a very far ahead. And I mean, this felt better than the game against Unicorns of Love did, but in theory, the 2 and 4 team should have been the host team by SK, and the 4 and 2 or whatever Unicorns of Love are should have been the more decisive one.
So the interesting thing about SK in their games this week has kind of been when SK looks better, it's because Sven Skaren looks better. And in these games specifically, Sven gave Jungle Echo his first win in the EU LCS. He was going for those ganks over the wall in mid lane from the Raptor Brush. You wind up dashing over the wall, getting the shield down, jumping in with your blink strike from your E, or your jump strike, whatever you want to call it, from the second part of your E, getting a really good gank down, especially if Fox is level 6 already, get the Petrifying Gaze after the stun comes in from the field, and it's just a really easy kind of rinse and repeat gank kill on Power of Evil, who continues to play a little bit reckless on Orianna in the mid lane, flashing forward to try to get damage down onto Fox, who just flashes away out of it, and then Power of Evil dies to a gank now that his flash is down. But Sven Skaren looking really strong. He played Lee Sin. He looked like that big, powerful Carrick-esque style Lee Sin that we saw in playoffs at the end of last split. He was 3-1-13 to end that game. But also Freddy, who has been looking, steady Freddy, the consistent, one of the top laners in Europe, has been looking like not very steady Freddy. I don't know what the opposite of steady is. Bad Freddy? I don't know.
The Freddy you thought from the beginning of Season 3 when Greg was the only one who liked him.
Yeah.
Bad Freddy.
AAA Freddy. So, he wasn't necessarily performing as well, and they couldn't rely on him to be a split push threat. They couldn't rely on him to take attention away from the carries on the team. And Candy Panda is still a little bit shaken up and maybe not used to playing competitively after taking a split off. And Fox can't shoulder all that burden because he's still a relatively new player. So what we wind up seeing is, if Sven Skaren and Freddy are off, SK doesn't work. If Sven Skaren is on and Freddy can at least do something for the team, then SK is on. And in both of those games, that's what happened. Because Freddy's been struggling, they throw him on Shen, very tanky top laner, can sit there with the Sunfire Cape and split push all day, and all he has to do is hit the R button on Vayne or the R button on Cassiopeia, and he contributes to the team for SK. So SK kind of found something that they can work with, but we'll have to see if they keep it up, because if teams just be like, oh, well, I'm going to ban Lee Sin, Rek'Sai, and, Cassiopeia. All right, what do you do now? Who's Shen going to protect?
Right. I mean, I felt as though Freddy did have a pretty good showing on Gnar. He had some really solid ultimates that, really set up the kills for Fox.
There was that one game-saving ultimate at their top lane inhibitor.
Yeah, it was. The caster said it was 4. I'm pretty sure it was 5 people into the inhibitor.
I think it killed one. That was the thing.
Yeah. Oh, okay. No, it was impressive. I mean, I think it's what SK needed. It'll be really interesting to see how they handle, next week. They have elements, which that's a fight there for them. I mean, I think it's right about where they are. Elements,
that's a huge position place, that one.
Yeah, Froggen's been doing, work, I think. He's been putting up some big numbers for teams, even though they haven't been winning all of their games. But this is a team that I think if we didn't see, even if the match against Unicorns of Love went the other way, I still don't think it would have been fair giving SK this game against Elements. I think it's tighter now that they won both. But then they also have H2K. So it's like SK shoot for the stars, but, don't get your hopes up too much.
At the same
because I think
time,
you're going to get bodied.
At the same time, is good and bad, because H2K struggled early on in the split, and SK put up a good fight against them. And that was kind of when we're like, oh, what's the matter with SK? They lost their first 2 games. Like, is this just a phase? Like, what's going on? So if they were able to put up an okay fight against a weak H2K, and both of the teams have shown marked improvement, maybe SK can do something. I'm not saying SK has a chance. I'm saying maybe they could put up a fight, but...
Playing devil's advocate to your point, maybe H2K devotes all their attention to Fnatic.
It's
says
also very true.
It's just SK. I mean, that would if H2K loses both of their games, that's very dangerous for them, because a loss against Fnatic will more than likely mean an additional loss against Fnatic, and to lose those 2 when you're trying to vie for a top spot or even the second spot, you're neck and neck with Origin at that point. So,
and just piggybacking off of like the spot position too, with SK Gaming playing H2K in the second game of next week, that's their first repeat. So their first repeat is one of the top 3 teams out of the way already, which means that the rest of their schedule has 2 top teams and then everybody else that they're really close in the positions with. So they can lose that game against H2K, and if they win everything else, SK will set themselves up to be in a good position.
For sure. I think at this point, just seeing the competition, their best expectation can be a very low playoff spot. But minimally, they need to be getting out of last. So it's the bottom of the barrel is very tight right now. You've got Rock Hat, you've got Copenhagen Wolves, you've got Elements, and you've got SK. But time is going to separate those out pretty soon. And hopefully SK can turn this momentum and move it forward.
Yeah, the Elements game is their first game against Elements, so that one matters, I think, even more than the second game. If they can win that game, I won't say it almost guarantees them a spot out of relegation, but it puts them in a better chance of not getting there. Because the more 1-1s or the more 2-0s you have against these bottom teams, it really helps you in the long run come playoff time.
It certainly will set a precedent for Week 9 of the LCS, where their very last game is actually played against Elements. So if things stay pretty similar throughout the split and the 2 teams are fighting at the bottom, that could potentially be a tiebreaker situation, depending on how the matchup comes.
Week 9 of EU could be huge, because isn't Copenhagen Wolves and Giants another one that plays that week? And I think...
Yep, but there's a little bit more of a displacement from there, and we'll wrap up actually Europe just with kind of hitting upon the other teams. Really mediocre standings as of right now. There's that big pile at the bottom, which we talked about. You've got Gambit one step up from there. You got Giants and Unicorns of Love, both 2 teams that have been really, I would say, pretty inconsistent this entire split. At 4-4 on the next rung up, and then you've got the big 3 of Origin, H2K, and Fnatic. And don't forget to send in those top 3s.
So the funny thing here is, and I think it's actually a really good transition point, Mott. So maybe we could piggyback off this. Is Giants and Dignitas?
No, only bad transitions here.
Okay. So speaking of bad transitions, Giants and Dignitas. Both of these teams were in relegation last split. Both Giants were 9th place. They fought themselves out of a tiebreaker for last, out of auto relegation. And Dignitas wound up taking 8th place. So both of them had to fight for their spot to get into LCS. Both of them had I think they both only had 6 wins, and Giants' 6th win was actually in the tiebreaker, so Giants only had 5 wins. But both of these teams were like bottom of the barrel. People kind of wrote them off, and they were like, all right, they're just going to be bottom of the barrel teams again. Let's step up with Rocket. Cloud9's going to be great. Like, there's no way that these teams could beat them, et cetera, et cetera. Giants came out of the gate swinging. Dignitas did very much the same thing. Both of them took down teams that people thought that they weren't going to be able to kind of touch. Like Giants wound up taking down Elements, who like rebuilt their roster and everybody thought was going to be great. They also wound up taking down I believe, wound up taking down Roccat, which everybody thought were going to be great. So they already have some like bigger names under their belt. Dignitas on the side of NA wound up taking down TSM, but nobody thought that was going to be a thing. So there's been so many like kind of comparisons between these two teams. But Giants this week, they had the week that was like, all right, prove yourself that you're, a top of the table team in Europe. You have a game against H2K where you could try to show as much as possible, even though H2K, regardless of what everybody thinks, was going to win that game, and did so in a very commanding fashion, kind of discrediting Giants a little bit. But their first game of the league was against Gambit, the 2-4 Gambit, who had just won their first couple of games. If you're a Giants and you want to be known as a top of the table team, those are the kinds of games you have to win. And they haven't been able to do that since beating the first couple of rounds of teams earlier on. The teams that they did wind up beating, Roccat, Elements, those kinds of Copenhagen Wolves, who were also in playoffs last split, those teams have a combined losing record. Whereas some of the other teams that are floating around them, like the Unicorns of Love, their teams that they've played against have a combined winning record. They've played against Orehen already. They've played against H2K. They've played against Fnatic. So all of those teams that Unicorns of Love have played against are top teams, whereas Giants are losing to teams that are below them in the standings. So it kind of starts to separate out a little bit. Whereas you look at Team Dignitas in North America, and especially some of their games from this week, and you kind of start to think Dignitas are starting to look like the real deal. Even though they had a little bit of a questionable, at least in my opinion, questionable jungle switch in the middle of like a 3-1 kind of start to their season, they wind up going with Helios, and people are a little bit uncertain of what's going to wind up happening, but they wind up stealing a game from TSM. They wind up stealing a game from, I believe it was Impulse this week.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, Dignitas is, it's only so often that you can have a team that keeps, quote unquote, stealing games from teams that are supposedly better than them before you realize that team is just better than some of those teams.
I mean, getting right into their game against Impulse, this, to me, I mean, I'm not a meta guy. I'm Silver 2. I don't really listen to the proper as much as I should. I have a very hard time usually detecting when a team loses in the pick ban phase. Yet to me, Tip's build against Dignitas just seemed completely inappropriate in this game. Dignitas had 3 I'm going to get directly inside of you and just live there picks with, I believe it was Xin Zhao. Help me out here.
Xin Zhao, they had Hecarim, they had Alistar, and they have Twisted Fate.
Yeah. The Alistar plays fantastic. He's a meat wall. He's so good right now. Gamsu on Hecarim. Holy shit. 5-man ults all day. Just being able to pierce directly into Impulse's lineup. I mean, who in this team is going to stop a Hecarim and a Xin Zhao and an Alistar? All of that CC together. So, you've got Echo, who I guess can blink out of it. You have Graves, who can't really do anything. You have Varus, who can maybe counter the engage if he doesn't get CC chained, like Dignitas was executing perfectly each time. You have Janna. That's not going to work. It's going to take care of maybe the first one, but when you have wave after wave of CC and heavy tanks moving in, and then you get Rek'Sai, it's just not enough.
So the thing is here, I didn't necessarily get a chance to watch the full game of this, so I don't necessarily know how the early game unfolded, because Dignitas also has a very heavy early game ganking jungler in Xin Zhao, who... So here's the thing with Xin Zhao. He's a very snowbally jungler. I'm pretty sure the Propers talked about this a couple of times, not necessarily recently, but in the past they've definitely talked about how his early game pressure is immense. He's like an extreme version of Lee Sin, because if he doesn't get any of that early game pressure into an advantage, he doesn't do anything for a majority of the rest of the game. But Helios in this meta picks the Xin Zhao because he is able to stick to targets, dive into a back line, and normally he blows somebody up. But going for a Cinder Hulk build, going for the Aegis of the Legion to provide a shield, give him a little bit of extra resistances against, the Echo and then the magic damage pop coming out from Varus's execution on his Blight stacks. Then going directly for a Thorn Mail, so that knowing that he's going to be in the middle of things and he's going to be focused down, he has a Cinder Hulk, a Thorn Mail, and a Locket to try to keep himself alive for as long as possible, to disrupt and knock one of those primary targets out with his ultimate, to just cause as much chaos as possible and to live for as long as possible before dying and letting the rest of the team kind of go in. This pickup in this composition was a little bit strange to me, because normally you would think okay, maybe Gragas can do the same kind of thing, but that was banned away. Rek'Sai would have been a really good choice, but Rek'Sai was taken away. The next kind of tier choice is Lee Sin, who isn't necessarily the most popular pick right now, unless maybe you're Sven Skaren or Diamond Prox, but... So the Xin Zhao pick is a little bit weird here. The Hecarim, very standard top lane pick. If you're able to get a teleport gank off as soon as you get the home guard, Hecarim is literally going to run away with that. And Gamsu is one of the only Hecarim players in both of the regions right now who doesn't default to Smite teleport top lane Hecarim. He goes Ignite teleport. There's an interview with him. I forget where it was. It was either on LOL Esports or on Dignitas's channel or something. I think it actually might have been on Dignitas's website itself, where they asked him about it. And he said, personally, it's just a stylistic choice, because between the challenging smite and the ignite, you're eventually going to get off relatively the same amounts of damage with the damage over time tick. But by going ignite, you don't pigeonhole yourself into having to go for Juggernaut enchantment first and being tanky and not having damage in the early game. Whereas if you go straight for the Trinity Force, like the build that Gamsu did this game, you wind up providing massive amounts of damage off of your first home guard teleport gang, because you go for the home guard teleport, you wind up getting a Sheen, and you run people over. It's just way more damage than going for Cinder Hulk and home guard teleport. And because of that, he snowballs.
We saw that gank.
Yeah.
Tip took Dragon, moved to mid, managed to get a kill from under the tower, take that tower, but then decided to go just a little bit too hard, starting to put pressure onto that tier 2 tower, got pushed back by what was left of Dignitas. Gamsu teleports into red side bush and meets them in the middle lane and pretty much gets, I forget if it was all 5 or if it was just 4, but gets off a huge ultimate. The rest of Dignitas shows up. They clean up. Gamsu went 11-0-10 in that game as Hecarim. I mean, he's just a monster. This game ended by, believe it or not, Tip getting a Baron. But at this point in the game, it was...
right?
It was so late that nothing mattered. As soon as the 1, 2, 3 of Dignitas's all in, you've got Alistar going in, knocking people up. You've got Xin Zhao able to go in, separate out people, and you've got Gamsu just able to ultimate everybody. I mean, you get melted, and that's just what happened. They melted them, and they were so tanky. Dignitas, without minions, were able to push directly into the base, take the inhibitor tower, the inhibitor, and the Nexus towers without minions. They just tanked it. And that was it. That was the game.
One of the things that's interesting about Dignitas, and I swear I'll get off the Dignitas horses after this one, but...
Gamsu won't.
So, yeah, literally. He is the Dignitas horse. Anyway, so one of the things that Skara had said in an interview many moons ago when he was still actually on Dignitas was he feels like due to the players on Dignitas and due to the way that they played the game, Dignitas is actually a very early game focused team. And that was true of the old Season 3, Season 4 Dignitas roster. Now, but they would always get some small incremental advantages. Maybe they weren't the best farmers in the world, and then when they get to the point where it was time to transition that into a Baron or transition that into a victory, they weren't able to do that. Now, looking at Dignitas and the way that the game has evolved and the way that these tanky supports that can initiate for someone like Kiwi Kid, who was still part of that Dignitas team, and shot calls for this Dignitas in this meta game here with Helios backing him up, who wanted to be a more aggressive jungler, who didn't want to just play second fiddle to Flame on the CJ teams. He wanted to be, aggressive. He wanted to go make moves around the map. Now that you have a team like just looking at this team composition, like as soon as Gamsu, Twisted Fate hit level 6, there's 2 potential teleport ganks to snowball something like a bottom lane composition. The one weird piece for me in Champion Select here was the Corki. But when you think about it, where do you want these ganks to be going? If you have two potential laners, mid lane and top lane, that can teleport in and gank somewhere, there's only one lane left to gank, and that's going to be bot lane. And you take one of the most powerful mid-game spiking AD carries in Corki, you build Trinity Force, you don't go for Infinity Edge, you go for the Bloodthirsters, you can finish it almost immediately, or quicker than the Infinity Edge anyway, and you start taking dragons, you start forcing fights, you start moving around the map, and you end the game before it gets to late game, and a double AD composition can outscale you.
Pretty much, and that's exactly what happened. We saw really great performances by Shifter as well, in addition to Gamsu in their game against Liquid. Liquid this week going 0-2. Speaking of knocking down the horse.
I'm just gonna mute my mic and cry for a little bit while you guys talking about this.
This game, I feel for Liquid on this one because there was a lot of strong team fights coming out of Liquid. They were able to really, really bring it to Dignitas in a bunch of those team fights. But Gamsu, Shifter getting quadra kills, I mean, it came down to timing on this. Dig had one awesome catch where I believe Liquid had just finished up a Baron attempt, and they went to go and spread out after the attack. And where's Dignitas? Could they possibly be in that top little bush that usually people throw a pink in and just ignore? Yeah, Dignitas come out of nowhere. They're able to pull off a bunch of kills, and then just push straight into the base and win after that. Liquid almost ended up taking them down a few times. It was really back and forth, but
the 50-minute games, though.
Yeah, Dignitas pulls it out in the end.
I don't know. The thing with Liquid for me is Liquid seemed like a very solid, together kind of team. But looking at the draft, like especially in the game against Dignitas this week, like looking at the draft, or even this, they had basically the same exact team composition against TSM, only they had Annie instead of Thresh. So it was Rumble, Sejuani, Jace, Kalista, and then support. It was Annie against TSM and Thresh against Dignitas. It's a little bit weird for me because you have Rumble and you have Sejuani, who like MSI era, early summer split, extremely, extremely strong picks. Then we have,
especially in Quas's hands with Rumble.
Yeah, still extremely strong, but
then we have the Sejuani pick, which has fallen off very, very hard recently. And unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to see the pick ban phase of this game against Dignitas, but Liquid, with first pick, bans out the Gragas, which should be your first choice for jungler in this circumstance, and then they don't take the Rek'Sai, which they let Helios get in, I believe it was the first or second rotation for Dignitas, probably the first rotation for Dignitas. So they wind up giving away, they ban out one of, and give away the second most powerful jungler, and then they default back to this Sejuani pick, who isn't the same Sejuani that we started the split with. She's had a little bit of nerfs and set back some of her damage output, and we see teams shying away from her. And yeah, she does synergize well with Rumble if you can get one of those big dragon fights, but you need dragon control. If you can get one of those big fights in your jungle, but you need vision control. You need to be able to set those kinds of things up. But then you're going with, Piglet's Kalista, who doesn't scream team fight to me. And you're going with Phoenix picking Jace in both of these games, which is, like we just said, he just got redone. He just got buffed. People are just starting to play with him. He's a newer pick. So you kind of have like, oh man, we'll play like we did in week 1, and then we'll also pick this new thing and see what it does. And it looked a little bit disjointed to me.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Oh, okay. My whole thing with this is the Kalista pick in both of these games. The way that Liquid played these games, the way that they set up their team comps, as Tom said, is mainly team fight oriented picks with the Rumble, with the Sejuani combo, and then you have the Jace for the early poke and then the heavy engage after that. And then you have Thresh Annie, who are obviously very good at starting those fights. But then you have the Callista, who, as the game goes longer and longer, as both of their games did. The Dignitas game was 53 minutes. I'm not exactly sure how long the TSM one, but it was a long one as well.
41 and a half.
Yeah, 41 minutes. The Callista pick doesn't seem to fit into their team comps. I think a Sivir would have been probably a better pick to try and get. Maybe even not a Graves. What is the other pick I'm thinking of? Maybe a Jinx. Maybe Caitlyn. A Jinx or a Caitlyn would have been fine. A Vayne even would have been better, I think, in the way that they were setting up these team comps. But it also came down to the lack of vision control, especially in the late game. When they got caught out after the Baron there, that really started to throw the game into chaotic mode, and then everybody was going everywhere. And in the Dignitas game especially, the vision control turned into the back and forth, and then Dignitas just ended. But if we transition to the TSM game, they had the same exact comp, except it was an Annie this time, and it ended up being another team fight at 40-minute mark that they ended up losing. And after a back and forth game, they were strong in the early game. They had good vision control. They were keeping up with TSM. They were ahead of TSM. And then the last team fight, Xpecial makes a questionable engage. Then Bjergsen...
Wicked questionable. I mean, I would say that the whole game was decided, and physically it was decided, but
it was decided on this. The flash Tibbers from Xpecial at the right on the other side of Liquid's red buff. Bjergsen gets a beautiful flank off and kills Phoenix immediately, getting him out of the fight. Then gets huge damage onto Piglet, getting him out of the fight. And TSM just clean up after that, and they win the game off that after Liquid could have started to stall out, trying to get the 5th Baron. But it came down to a questionable engage and a little bit of vision control that they didn't have in the later stages of the game again, which hurt them.
And that was a flash engage against an Alistar, wasn't it? They were trying to pick off one of
an Alistar
the only tank.
And Gnar. I think Dyrus on Gnar was standing right there as well. So it was against the two tankiest people on their team that he flash engaged on.
It kills me too, because it's not that they didn't know where Bjergsen was. They had gotten poke on Bjergsen. Bjergsen had returned to mid lane, and that's when Xpecial made the jump. I mean, this was in their own jungle. I mean, the problem is that Liquid had this formula already worked out. There was a solid Baron attempt where they started, TSM approached, Xpecial flashed, got a Tibbers on Bjergsen, they blew him up, and TSM was smart enough to entirely back off. They got that Baron for free. Then they decide to do that same plan, but ignore the fact that Bjergsen is right behind them, and go for Lustboy on an Alistar, which at this point I actually think he already had his ult going. So TSM just able to clean up after that. Bjergsen got right into the back, blew up Piglet, hit his ult, or hit his Zhonya's, waited for the rest of the team to clean it up. I mean, great performances by Bjergsen, 6-3 and 4 on Azir. Dyrus, awesome game on Gnar, 3-0 and 6, and Torrens more supporting than anything, but 2-0-5 Wild Turtle, meh.
I mean,
but it just sucks. It was that one decision that ruined the game for them.
I mean, I don't claim to be a master on the current League of Legends metagame or anything, and I don't claim to be a pro with the inside knowledge to everything, but when you're picking these picks that scream team fight and flash anti-engage and follow up with the Sejuani stun and the Rumble equalizer comes down and your Callista's 0-1 and 6, I don't like the Callista anymore.
Yeah, I agree with Kyle with the Sivir pickup. I mean, that would have given them the tools to put Annie in the right spot at the right time, especially when you back that up with Talisman of Ascension. We saw the synergy. We saw Dominate being. I mean, even though they were I forget which game it was. It was either TSM or Dignitas. I hate it when teams run the exact same comps, but we saw, even though it was under their enemy teams, whichever which one it was, the Sejuani ult into the perfectly layered Quas Rumble ult. That was an awesome tool to have. If you can follow that up with an additional stun afterwards, if you can time that properly with Annie, great. Maybe the idea is to have Piglet just running around in the background, cutting them down. But at the same time, Sivir being able to deliver those would have been much better.
I'm just going to say this right now. Liquid banned Sivir against TSM. And also against Dignitas.
And
they banned it as well.
Maybe you want to give Piglet a comfort pick for him, and you want to take the comfort pick away from Wild Turtle, a struggling Wild Turtle, mind you.
I think the Vayne was the better pick in this situation, especially since they banned out the Sivir in the team fight.
So
kind of
here's the thing: right now, there's like a weird kind of like influx of like, well, the AD carries are being played right now. Like before, Corki was nowhere to be found. Now you're seeing Corki in a lot of games. Before it was like all about Urgot, Kalista, and then the Sivir kind of popped up and made it like a little bit of a triangle kind of thing. But now we do have, like, especially in Europe, what we saw earlier on was people picking up the Vayne against the Sivir, because out of all of the AD carries, Sivir gives you a lane with Vayne where you can actually trade auto attacks, because both of you have a comparable attack range. So the Vayne goes from being a short range pick that gets bullied around the early lane phase and needs a safe lane that you need to lane swap with to scale up and blah 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 blah, to the Sivir is the one that needs to lane swap and needs to wind up being safe for a little while so she can get some farm and then activate her ultimate and run into team fights that way. The Vayne, if you get into a 2v2 lane against the Sivir, should be good. But the only issue is then you have somebody that you need time to scale up with, and you do have a shorter range AD carry. So if you're going for something like a Jace pickup and you do want to play poke and then engage, it's not necessarily the best. But that's where the Sivir is good, because you play poke and you want to engage, you hit the go button and then blow them up with all your ultimates. Like, I don't know. Maybe Piglet just doesn't play Sivir.
This is pissing me off. I'm going through the Reddit thread right now. They first pick Kalista in both games.
If it's a comfort pick for one of your strongest carries, then give them. I say give them the pick. I
say give them the pick, but I think you need to adapt your jungler or your top laner to better suit a Kalista composition. Kalista is a very strong AD carry. I'm not saying that Kalista is a bad pick whatsoever, and I'm not saying that Piglet is a bad player or a bad Kalista player. Kalista is a very strong pick in the game right now. However, Kalista does not scale into the late game like a hyper carry. She has a very potent early to mid game power spike, and she has a very different item build, and because of the no critical strike in her item build, she cannot deal as much damage as some later game carries. Similar kind of thing to the Corki. He can burst harder and hits a power spike earlier by going for the Trinity Force. So if you're going to try to get somebody in a lane matchup, I think Corki might come out slightly ahead against the Kalista. You might think, but Kalista can dodge his phosphorus bombs, there's all this kind of stuff. Yeah, but you pair Corki up with a very tanky support, and Kalista's never going to be able to kill somebody in that lane. So it's like a weird kind of like way that these AD carry matchups are going. I don't blame Liquid for first picking Kalista, especially when Piglet is your AD carry, but I think you need to kind of reevaluate where you're going to be going with the rest of your composition. Like, don't ban away one of the strongest junglers and leave another one open and don't take it whatsoever. Like, you need to supplement that Kalista pick. You need to snowball it so that you have a power spike that you can work around.
Yeah, their pick and ban phase in both games were exactly the same, minus a Nidalee ban against TSM and a Kog'Maw ban against Dignitas. Everything about Liquid was the exact same, and both games ended the exact same way, with the team fight at the end of the game not being winnable because of the AD carry. That's all I'm saying. I'm pissed off at them now. God,
one of them was because their AD carry got annihilated, and the other one may have more been about the choice in the comp.
No. In the TSM one, it was Phoenix who got destroyed. Kalista was the last one alive after they aced them. So, again, not doing much, hiding from everybody who you can't kill at the end of the game.
Well, Liquid's going to have to...
Let's get off Liquid.
Well, they're going to really have to put it together in Week 5. They have their sole remaining team to face, the number 1, the 7-1 CLG that week. So they're really going to have to be on their game. And then their first game of the turn of the split is going to be a Week 2 repeat against Gravity, their old buddies. which they lost, actually. The Gravity was able to deliver Liquid their first loss, and for a while their only loss. So that's going to be a pretty harrowing week for Liquid. It's either going to be a tremendous success with even a win against one of those teams is going to help them keep their positioning, which is right now in a bit of a free fall. But it'll be interesting to see. Keep your eye on Liquid for next week.
Liquid's got a very big next week coming up. And also, I think they're going to go 1-1 for sure because they haven't lost to CLG in 2 years. So
that's true.
Why start now?
They do have the tradition on their side.
Well, CLG, hopefully their traditions all meet up because CLG's right about at that point. Like, it's feeling really good right now that CLG's about to fall apart. So, they're doing well. They maybe have some fan support. Let's get ready to just throw everything. Maybe this is the start.
Actually, you saying Liquid's schedule now, I have to go and change everything about my fantasy team because everybody plays everybody again this week.
We'll hit up fantasy in just a little bit. I do want to wrap up NA. And I had this perfect segue, and Mitch would have been proud where I was going to say, and speaking of blowing up everything, Team TDK, 0-8, still not playing their starters. Over-under on whether or not they're going to play next week?
No.
Nope.
Because
not gonna happen.
Over-under on the amount of wins they get this split. Half.
Half of it.
What a shitty time. I feel so bad for Seraph. Like,
there's a Reddit thread that popped up saying that they might not even show up for the rest of the split because they have to get work visas now instead of just traveling visas because of Riot's new rules, and it takes months to get work visas figured out. So they're probably not going to get their players.
I am having a feeling that this is going to be another team Fusion situation where TDK, well, it's a little different from Fusion, but they're going to get back into the challenger scene. They're going to lose their starting lineup, at least enough of the pieces to, quote-unquote, disband the team. And then Riot's going to force them to give up their challenger spot. It's just the way it's going to happen. Really sucks for TDK. I mean, I guess if you're any other team, if you're Team 8, if you're Cloud9, you're kind of wiping your brow about the auto-relegation spot, maybe. I'd say it's still maybe too early for that. You've got Cloud9 at 2-6. You've got Team 8 at 2-6. But we'll see. We'll see. Gravity had a hot and cold week this week. They won against Team 8, which should be expected, but lost against TSM. TSM, of course, going 2-0. CLG, easy week. TDK, Cloud9, 2-0. Not even a question. And then Enemy Esports pulling out a win against Cloud9 and losing against Impulse, another team that's struggling, not doing as well as I think many people expected them to. But maybe if you kind of look critically at what a challenger team is supposed to be, this is right where they're supposed to be.
Yeah. Next week's a very big match, or a very big week for the middle of the pack teams. Liquid, Impulse, and Gravity at 5-3 and 4-4 for Impulse. All of them play each other except Liquid plays CLG. Gravity plays Liquid and Impulse next week. Liquid playing Gravity and CLG. A very important week for these guys going into the second half of the split.
Especially those second games, because that's going to determine if it's a 1-1 head-to-head or if it's a 2-0, like right out of the gate. Like especially even TSM versus CLG, if TSM beats CLG and hands CLG their second loss, and then both of those teams move on to not lose any more games, TSM is your first-place team because they own the 2-0 against CLG. Same kind of thing with Gravity and Liquid. If Gravity beats Liquid here, they could both go on to be X4 teams, and then Gravity would get the seed over Liquid just because they won that early on in the split.
Adopt the fourth place curse. It's a big week for a lot of teams. I mean, you've got what should be a great matchup from TSM against CLG. It wasn't last time. It hasn't been in the past, but we're seeing a better CLG, I think, than we have been, so who knows? We already talked about Liquid. Enemies got a pretty big week against Dignitas and Team 8. And a barn burner, we got Cloud9 versus TDK. Maybe TDK's first win.
Whoa.
No
Cloud9
way.
isn't that bad.
Mark it. Mark it. It is, I don't even know how far into the Audacity.
If 1 hour and 5 minutes.
If they
1 hour, 5
lose...
minutes.
If Cloud9 loses to Substitute.team, I don't know. Like, if Cloud9 loses to Substitute.team, they should rename themselves to Cloud8 because they've been knocked down a peg.
Well, they're currently tied with teammates, so that'll wrap it up for North America. Basically, watch Week 5 for them. A lot of excitement going on. Big
Liquid
matchups.
Gravity are the teams to watch. I think this week. This is a huge week for them coming up. So.
I'd say it's a huge week for everybody. I mean, Dignitas should have 2 more wins, putting themselves up higher. TSM has a chance to lose some. CLG has a chance to lose some. We may see a very different standings come the end of Week 5. Don't forget to submit your questions, or your answers, rather, for a chance to win 10 RP. Let's wrap up this week, as we do every week, with some fantasy trash talk. I want to say a big fuck you to Double Lift. For those of you who didn't pay attention this week, Double Lift, shooting some hoops, ends up gashing his finger in the worst way, and everyone pretty much freaks out because they're going to put in a sub for him. So, it being Father's Day weekend, and the tradition in my family is to go up to our summer house in Maine, I swapped him out for Olamne, went on my way, thinking I might lose this week. Double Lift usually puts up pretty big numbers for me, but he's not playing. Well, I did lose this week, and it's because Double Lift put up 73 points, and
no, that's not it, mate. Because you still would have lost anyways.
Okay, I needed to do 2 things to win. I needed to swap out Double Lift, and I needed to do what my brain has been telling me, but my heart wouldn't let me, which is cut Meteos and cut Cloud9. And I've done all of those things now. I now have Trashy, actually, from Enemy Esports. I think a pretty good pick for this week, considering they've got a matchup against Team 8. For my jangler, and I've got Dignitas for my team. So, good looks for next week, I think.
If you haven't figured it out already, I beat Mott.
Yeah.
Suck it. The anti-Mott is the Mott now. I am ruler and lord.
Nope. Not quite. We're all tied, basically. There's a huge reckoning in the middle. Sifa, the elusive man, is currently at 3-1, beating Optimus Tom. The rest of us, except for Box, is all 2-2.
I took a big risk this week to beat Sifa, because Sifa and I were both X-1 teams going into this week. So I was like, all right, I'm going to beat Sifa, because my team, honestly, is subpar. My team is being carried by Bjergsen, Amazing, and Kasing. That's pretty much the only reason why I'm winning anything in fantasy. The rest of my picks have been relatively bad. I was given Forgiven, who I wound up dropping. I was giving Rush, who I have no reason to play. I was given Visit Chachi, who plays Poppy, so I can't expect anything from him. So, I just have, a plethora of, mediocre players that get me 20 points, and then I go against everybody else's super team who gets 70 points, and then I just rely on Bjergsen and Kasing to get me 1,000 points between the two of them, and then everything's okay. But this week I took a huge risk because Rockhat was playing against the 0-win SK and the 1-win Elements, and I picked up Rals and Nuke Duck, and I think they gave me a combined 19 points in their 2 games.
That hurts.
So I rolled over, and despite Bjergsen trying his damn hardest to get me a win, I lost by 50 points to Sifa's team, which was running something along the lines of, it was running muck with Impact and Pole Belter, and Dyrus having fantasy points, which is something I'm not used to seeing. So it was not a good week at all. Sorry, Rals and Nuke Duck put up a combo of 21.5 something points.
Well, considering in most weeks you can't even touch any of my other single player scores by combining Meteos and Cloud9's points, I feel your pain somewhat. I've got it pretty good. I've got a great lineup. I've got even better people on my bench. But overall, this was a tough week.
Can I just say something? Chris has been destroying the past 2 weeks. He got 350 points last week compared to my win of 287. And then the week before that, he got... How many points did he get? He got 320 points.
For some reason, initially, I thought you meant Chris, the current 80 carry of, I think, Coast. And I was like, he's a challenger, and there's no way he got 300 points.
So here's
and then I remembered Chris is a person.
So here's the deal. So Chris has what we'd like to call the Holy Trinity. He has Febivin, Niels, and Fnatic. So not only that, but he also has Ryu and Lustboy. Everybody on Chris's team is in the top 3 of NA or EU.
Yeah, he has Quas as his top laner. The only weak point you'd think would be Smithy as his jungler, but he gets huge points because they keep winning.
Yeah,
so,
but you do have the 55-point Kasing on the support. Supports? I don't know what they did.
He actually outscored Yellowstar last week, which is relatively unheard of.
Well, I don't know. I can't really complain. I mean, when Soaz is hot, he's hot. I've got Soaz now trashy in the jungle spot, Xpeke in mid, Reckless, Yellowstar, and Double Lift. It's good most weeks. It's pretty good. But speaking of pretty good, that is going to do it for this week's pretty good episode of the LCS Rundown. Do not forget to enter into our RP giveaway. That's 10 RP. We're not the only show where you can get that, though. Be sure to reach out to, I think the LZOL podcast is doing something. 4 Awards is doing something. The Proper's doing something. The Twitter account's doing something. The Facebook group's doing something. Everybody is doing something, and all you need to do is explore this lovely network of ours to find out more. For your ultimate source of information, you can always go to the subreddit. That is reddit.com/r/TForce Network. Do not forget.
I write novel responses to everything in there, by the way. I just look back at my last couple of Reddit posts, and 3 posts fills up the entire front page. I'm just like, oh man, I should be doing work.
Yeah, I mean, if you ever have any questions for anybody in the network, that's a really good place to put them. A lot of people do hang out on that and go put in information. Plus, it tells you what's going on with the rest of the network. Battle Arena is having some sign-up stuff going on right now. There's a lot of information going on about the tournament that we're putting on. You can get the quick recaps of our D&D adventures from the 3 different podcasts we have going up for D&D right now. There's just so much going on in the network. It's a very exciting time for everybody. Be sure to take advantage of that as much as you possibly can. But speaking of taking advantage, I will take advantage of the time and resign the show. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next week.
Bye-bye.
These goddamn